What if I told you the serpent in the garden was never just a snake? What if the image we were shown as children, the talking reptile curled around a tree, was only the surface? From Sunday school lessons to sermons echoing through pulpits, we were handed a picture that felt safe, simple, almost cartoon-like. A creature with a hiss, tempting Eve with fruit, just a story about disobedience, right? But what if there was more? What if what we were told was only a shadow of the truth? You see, the original Hebrew doesn't just describe a snake, it hints at something more ancient, more intelligent, and deeply spiritual. Something not crawling on its belly at first, but standing, speaking, and moving with intent. This wasn't just an animal, it was a presence. A voice that twisted truth with precision. A spirit that didn't just enter the garden, but knew exactly how to speak the language of seduction. We were taught to focus on the bite of the fruit. But few ever showed us what stood behind the offer. And now, you're about to see it. Not just the deception that entered Eden, but the blueprint of how deception still enters your life, your choices, your spirit. This isn't just about what happened back then, it's about what's still happening now. So before we go deeper, like this video, subscribe, and most importantly, open your spirit. Because what you're about to discover may shift your entire understanding of the Bible, and awaken something you were never taught to question. Now let's dive in. The shocking secret of the serpent in Genesis, what the Hebrew text reveals. Section 1, the ancient Hebrew clue you never saw. In the beginning, a voice spoke in the stillness of Eden, a voice not from below, but from a presence that shimmered, radiant and wise, cloaked not in scales, but in something far more disarming. When we hear the word serpent, our minds conjure images of slithering reptiles. But the ancient Hebrew language whispers a deeper truth, one that most never see. The word written in Genesis 3 verse 1 is nachash, a word that carries weight, mystery, and layered meanings. Yes, it can mean serpent, but it also carries the essence of enchanter and shining one. Not just a beast of the field, but something luminous, something that mesmerizes not by fear, but by fascination. The moment we reduce this being to a mere animal, we lose the pulse of the warning embedded in the text. Nachash is not just describing the outward form, but the function, the effect. It's the seducer of minds, the whisperer of half-truths, the one who doesn't terrify, but impresses. This was not a hissing creature crawling on its belly. This was a presence that shimmered with wisdom, spoke with knowledge, and appeared as though it held divine insight. It's no wonder Eve listened. Genesis says it was more cunning than any beast of the field. But cunning here means shrewd, calculated, artful, like a being who knew how to twist truth until it still sounded holy. And this is where many stumble. Because we expect deception to be obvious. We expect darkness to come dressed in shadows. But 2 Corinthians 11 verse 14 reminds us, even the adversary can masquerade as an angel of light. That's what Nachash did. It appeared in the garden, not as a monster, but as a messenger. Not with threats, but with suggestions. Not with force, but with fascination. And this is what many still fall for today. Deception rarely comes dressed in evil. It comes cloaked in beauty, intelligence, charm. It mimics enlightenment. It mimics wisdom. And just like Eve, we lean in, not because we want to rebel, but because the voice sounds right. That's the danger. Now consider this. When Israel was bitten by serpents in the wilderness, Moses didn't kill them. He raised up a bronze serpent, a symbol of the very thing that afflicted them. And those who looked at it lived. Numbers 21:9. Why? Because healing doesn't always come by erasing the image, but by confronting it, understanding it, and overcoming it by looking through it. This is not just about a story in Eden. It's a mirror held up to our generation. Today, the voice of Nachash is still speaking. Not through reptiles, but through platforms, pulpits, philosophies, dressed in light, offering wisdom, inviting questions. And unless we discern, unless we return to the ancient words, not the translations passed down, but the raw language of the Spirit, we'll keep mistaking deception for revelation. You see, many aren't being led away by obvious darkness. They're being pulled in by things that look holy, sound wise, and feel spiritual. And that is the terrifying brilliance of Nachash. But here's the chilling part. What if this being never left the garden, but simply changed its disguise? Section 2, The Serpent's Real Identity and the Ancient Rebel. You've read it many times. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, but pause. Ask yourself, what kind of being speaks with wisdom? What kind of creature walks upright, reasons, persuades, and questions divine instruction? This was no ordinary animal slithering in dust. No, something ancient stood in that garden. Something that once stood among the holy, now twisted, now veiled in shadow. Before Adam took breath, before the foundations of Eden were planted, there was a realm unseen, a throne higher than imagination, where heavenly sons gathered. Among them, one shimmered with radiance, clothed in stones of fire, moving among the holy mountain of God. Ezekiel saw him. He described his beauty, his elevation, his fall. The king of Tyre, yes, but also a mystery pointing beyond flesh, into a spirit that was once perfect, until iniquity was found in him. This wasn't a serpent in the way we understand serpents. No. This was a fallen one. A being once anointed. A creature who knew the voice of God not by faith, but by proximity. He had stood in the presence. He had heard the thunder that forms galaxies. And still, he rebelled. Isaiah records a cry of ambition, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will make myself like the Most High. Can you feel the weight of that pride? This is not just arrogance. It is war against the very order of creation. This being was cast down, fallen from the heights of glory, yet not destroyed. Not silenced. And where does he reappear? In a garden meant for purity. In the midst of innocence. Not in fire. Not in force. But in subtlety. This serpent, this ancient rebel, did not roar. He whispered. He didn't challenge God outright. He questioned, did God really say? This was not about fruit. This was about authority. It was about allegiance. It was about trust. He offered knowledge, but concealed its cost. He cloaked rebellion in the language of wisdom. And Eve listened, not to an animal, but to an intelligence. A divine being who had once known heaven, now offering a counterfeit version of it. The scriptures tell us in Revelation that this being is that ancient serpent, who deceives the whole world. But do you realize the danger of that statement? The deception isn't loud. It's logical. It makes sense. It even feels right. And therein lies the terror. Because sometimes, temptation looks like enlightenment. Sometimes, the very thing that pulls you from God sounds like it came from heaven. But it didn't. And that's the haunting question, who is influencing your decisions when no one is watching? When you're alone in your mind, when your desires begin to whisper louder than your convictions, who are you listening to? Eve didn't just eat a fruit. She responded to an invitation. A seduction of thought. And that's how it still works today. This being wasn't just targeting Eve. He targeted the order of God. He targeted trust. He targeted destiny. Because the moment you question God's voice, you open yourself to another one. And not all voices come from outside. Some of them are ancient. Some of them are familiar. Some sound holy, but carry something dangerous. So ask yourself, can something look divine, feel enlightening, even carry truth, and still be evil? Yes. And it's happening every day. That is why discernment is not just a gift, it is survival. We are surrounded by voices, teachings, revelations. But any wisdom not rooted in obedience will always lead to rebellion. And rebellion doesn't always come with horns. Sometimes, it wears robes. Temptation, especially in this age, often comes clothed in spiritual vocabulary. But stripped of truth, even the most divine-sounding words become a weapon against your soul. And now the question that burns in the silence, if this being had fallen from such glory, why did he choose her? Why was Eve his target? And more importantly, what exactly was he really offering her? Stay with me. What's about to unfold next will shake everything you thought you knew about that moment in Eden. Section 3, The Real Temptation, More Than a Fruit. The serpent's offer in the garden was never about a simple fruit. It was an offer that reached far beyond the physical. It was an invitation to become like God himself. In the silence of that moment, a profound spiritual crisis unfolded, one that echoes through all of humanity's history. When the serpent said, "You will be like God," it was not merely tempting Eve to taste disobedience. It was tempting her to rewrite her own identity, to replace the Creator's authority with her own. The heart of the matter was not the fruit, but the desire to possess divine knowledge and power apart from God's will. This temptation reveals a deep spiritual truth. At the core, Eve's decision sprang from a crisis of identity. She longed to break free from her created role and grasp control for herself. This same longing resurfaces centuries later in the story of the Tower of Babel, where humanity declares, "Let us make a name for ourselves." Again, the drive is to elevate the self, to seize godhood on human terms. The pattern is unmistakable. From Eden to Babel, the desire to usurp God's place reveals a heart struggling with insecurity and hunger for control. It is a hunger that distorts our relationship with God, convincing us that He withholds what we need, that we can claim divine status through our own efforts. Even in the wilderness, when the tempter confronted Jesus, the offer was the same: all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, if only he would bow down and worship. This offer, though cloaked in authority and power, was a shortcut to divine rule without the path of surrender. The serpent's true temptation was not simply disobedience. It was the invitation to dethrone God within one's own heart. It was a call to self-exaltation, disguised as empowerment. Pause and reflect. What is the one thing you desire that you secretly believe God is holding back from you? What part of your heart still wrestles with the urge to seize control, to be the ultimate authority over your life? Many walk daily in this same trap, consuming forbidden fruit, not out of blatant rebellion, but because of an inner unrest, a twisted hunger to be gods in their own right. This is the real struggle beneath surface temptations. And yet, this story is far from over. What if the act in Eden was not the first attempt at godhood, nor the last? What if, even now, humanity continues to reach for a throne that belongs only to God? Section 4, The Hidden Pattern of Deception in Scripture. You may have never noticed, but there is a hidden rhythm in the way deception works throughout the Bible. A pattern so old, so subtle, it weaves through stories of the mighty and the humble alike, a pattern that has been whispered across generations, echoing in the chambers of the heart, quietly luring the soul away from truth. It begins not with loud noise or chaos, but in the silence of isolation, the twisting of reality, and the enticing promise of power that is not meant for us. Consider Samson, a man chosen by God, endowed with strength beyond measure. Yet, even he was caught in a web spun with tender threads of love and trust. Delilah, with her gentle words and patient persistence, did not come as an enemy wielding a sword. No, she came as a confidant, a companion, someone who promised intimacy and affection. But behind that veil was the ancient dance of deception. Isolate the heart, whisper doubts, and offer a power that seems to belong only if you betray what God has entrusted to you. In those moments, Samson's own strength became the very thing that could be taken away, because he allowed himself to be separated from the source of his power, deceived into believing the lie that love could be wielded without sacrifice or wisdom. Then there is the story of Ananias and Sapphira, a couple who appeared to give generously, who dressed their actions in the cloak of faith and community. Yet beneath their generosity lay a twisted desire, not for God's glory, but for human praise. They isolated themselves in their lie, creating a distance from the Spirit's guidance, offering falsehood instead of truth. The Spirit saw beyond the surface, exposing the deception not with harshness but with the piercing light of holiness. Their story warns us. Deception often begins with good intentions that have lost their way, with trust placed in appearances rather than in the unwavering truth of God. The pattern is unmistakable. This ancient method, isolate, twist, offer false power, is like a serpent, subtle and cunning. It flatters the heart, questioning the very integrity of God's promises. It speaks in soft tones that seem holy, masking lies with the language of faith. And too often, we find ourselves caught in this cycle, wondering why the same patterns of brokenness and betrayal repeat in our lives. Ask yourself now, can you recognize the lies when they come dressed in holiness? Have you noticed the cycles that pull you away, again and again, from the peace God intends? These are not mere coincidences. They are the echo of that ancient strategy, seeking to divide your heart, isolate your spirit, and separate you from the source of true life. If we do not guard our minds, if we do not anchor our hearts deeply in God's truth, we become easy prey. Vulnerable to voices that speak only to the self, that promise power without sacrifice, glory without humility. These voices come not as storms, but as whispers, drawing us away step by step until we no longer recognize the path back to God. But what if I told you this deception's purpose is far more sinister than just leading us astray? What if its ultimate goal is to divide us, not only from God, but from each other, from holiness itself? It is a plan to fracture the very unity God designed, to sever the connections that bind us in faith, love, and truth. Section 5, The Real Loss in Eden, More Than Paradise. In the cool of the day, a sound once familiar became strangely foreign, the voice of the Creator calling out across a broken world. Adam, who had walked freely in the garden, now hides. Not because Eden is lost, but because something deeper has been severed, the intimate communion between man and God. It is this disconnection, more than the absence of paradise itself, that marks the true defeat in the story of Eden. When God called out, "Where are you?" it was not just a question of location, but a call to come back, to return to relationship, to restore what was fractured. Yet, Adam's response, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid," reveals the raw wound beneath the surface. It was not the fear of punishment alone that caused him to hide, it was shame. The unbearable weight of shame that clouded his heart, blurring his vision of God's nearness, driving him into isolation. This moment in Genesis is not just an ancient tale, it echoes in every heart that has felt unworthy, distant, or silent before the throne of grace. Shame, that relentless thief, does not only rob joy but erects walls that keep us from stepping forward in faith, walls that whisper lies that God's love is no longer for us. And yet, the story does not end in despair. Like the prodigal son in the Gospel's timeless parable, there is a journey from hiding back into the embrace of the Father. The son's shame was profound, but it was met with a love more profound still, a love that runs to meet us, that restores without hesitation, that calls us child even when we have strayed far. The Father does not wait to condemn, instead, he waits to celebrate the return, to remove the shame, and to bring us home. As the Word declares, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. The victory is not simply that sin is forgiven, but that the veil of shame is lifted, and relationship is renewed. Understand now that the true triumph of the enemy was never about stealing a garden or a place of beauty. It was about stealing connection, cutting off the voice of God from the ear of man, silencing the fellowship that breathes life into the soul. Spiritual warfare wages most fiercely not in battles of power, but in the quiet moments when shame convinces us to turn away from prayer, when it convinces us to believe we are too far gone to be restored. Ask yourself now, are you more concerned with appearing righteous than with being known by God? Has shame ever held you back from seeking Him in your darkest moments? The path back to the garden of your soul is not paved with perfection, but with the willingness to be seen, with the courage to step into God's waiting arms. You were never meant to carry this burden alone. The second Adam, Jesus Christ, came not only to defeat the darkness but to walk with you. To restore the broken relationship and to invite you back into the garden, where your soul can once again dwell in the presence of the Father. So hear this, no matter how far you have hidden, no matter the shame that weighs upon you, the voice of God still calls your name. And He waits. Not with judgment, but with open arms, ready to renew, to heal, and to restore the sacred bond that was never meant to be lost. The serpent's lies have not vanished, they continue to whisper in the shadows, seeking to sever your connection to the Father. But take heart, for God's truth is alive and steadfast, shining brighter than any deception. Stay rooted in His Word, discern the subtle snares that seek to pull you away, and never cease walking hand in hand with your Creator. If this message has opened your eyes, don't keep it to yourself, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video, comment below with the truth that struck your heart the most, and subscribe for more Spirit-led teachings. Together, let's awaken this generation to the power of God's unshakable truth.